I knew that to really understand Edmonton's Chinatown today, I had to go back and look at the Chinese people's experience here from the beginning. So the first few weeks into this project had me reading a lot about Chinese Canadian history, watching a lot of Chinatown videos, and exchanging messages back and forth with Sean about what I was discovering. I also needed to figure out who I should and could speak to about Chinatown for this project, and one of the organizations recommended to me was the Chinese Benevolent Association. The Chinese Benevolent Association, or CBA, has been operating in Edmonton since 1929. They basically cared for the ethnic Chinese residents here through past hardships such as the Great Depression, World War II, the Chinese Exclusion Act, as well as present-day challenges for immigrants, seniors, and youth. I sent the CBA an email to tell them about my project and to see if I could set up a time to chat. Mei Hung, one of the current chairs of the CBA, agreed to meet with me on a cold February evening. Just as a quick side note, it feels kind of culturally weird and disrespectful for me to be calling older Chinese people in this project by just their first and last names. I'll do it once for the sake of fully addressing them and their titles, but then I'm just going to use Auntie or Uncle after that. So anyways, back to meeting Auntie Mei. After explaining a little bit about my docuseries and what I was trying to do, Auntie Mei gave me some documents to borrow and look through to learn more about the history of city plans for our Chinatown and some of the things that the community has had to fight for, with some successes and some rejections.
The Seattle, San Francisco, LA, they're all doing well. Okay, but what did they do that we are not doing here?
Right. Having these documents, in addition to my own research and attending a local Chinatown heritage presentation, taught me a lot about the formation of our specific Chinatown. Okay, so here's what I found out. So zooming out to the beginning to look at the timeline of Edmonton's Chinatown, the first Chinese people to come to Edmonton were brothers, Cheng Ji and Cheng Yan, who came from Calgary in May of 1890. In 1899, it was reported that 13 Chinese men resided in Edmonton, working in the town's sole Chinese restaurant and 2 Chinese laundries. Most of the men actually came up from Calgary, where they were escaping discrimination and violence from white Calgarians who were blaming them for bringing over and spreading smallpox at the time. Sounds a bit familiar. Edmonton started to grow in the years before World War I, and the Chinese population grew with it. Despite many prohibiting legislation such as the head tax and employment restrictions, in 1911, this is when Chinatown officially started to form in Edmonton, with a reported 254 Chinese people, with only 4 of them being women. Chinatown at this point was about 3 city blocks, stretching from Jasper Avenue up to 102nd Avenue on the west side of 97th Street. With this bachelor society of mainly Chinese men, clan associations started to be formed, which are basically groups of people with the same family name, such as the Wangs, Jis, or Ma's. Auntie Mei told me that anyone who didn't belong to those clan associations by name, the CBA took care of by providing legal representation, healthcare, and even the funds to send the ashes of deceased Chinese people back to China for a proper burial. With the Chinese Exclusion Act coming into effect in 1923, the Chinese population declined all across Canada. During this time, the Chinese residents in Edmonton mostly kept their heads low. They worked, and entertained themselves with local plays, concerts, and operas. Throughout the 1930s to 50s, with the Great Depression and World War II, Chinatown became like a skid row. A lot of Chinese residents started to move out to other neighborhoods as they became better off financially. The people who stayed in Chinatown were mainly elderly single men who couldn't afford better accommodations, or new immigrants who couldn't speak English and didn't have much money. In my initial email, I had said to Auntie May that I wanted to interview community members to learn more about the early Chinese experience in Edmonton. And to my surprise, she straight up called up one of the OGs of Chinatown, Frank G, who I will refer to as Uncle G from now on. And an interview was arranged for the following week on the spot. And I thought, all right, I'm in it now. Hello. Oh, hello. Hello. Hello.
呢啲滾水。
哦，等我介紹，呢一位朱生咧係中華會館上幾任嘅主席，佢做咗好耐㗎，所以咧佢對呢度嘅歷史咧就好清楚嘅。係。OK， 所以呢個分定器嘅。
咧你有好多人咧，你就想留低喺度啦。OK， 留低喺度咧就拉尾就轉咗咧就係有人頭稅啦。OK， 呢個當然你已經係知道呢個人頭稅呢個 OK， head tax 啦。OK， 可以講話一窮二白。OK， 啲人咧可咩嘅冇辦法咁啊就算係嚟到呢度點咩嗰陣時咧，或者都可以即係希望能夠有一個有一個生活喺度咁。嗱，你都唔係加拿大嘅公民，你只能夠係喺呢度逗留居留喺度咁。嗰啲年代咧，我哋啲華人咧就其實咧就即係受好多嘅咩啦嘅歧視啊各方面嘅嘢啦。嗱，至到咧第二次世界大戰 OK 喺1945年結束。1945年就個歷史嚟講咧，係我哋呢有500個華人咧就去參加呢個二戰啊。OK， 所以二戰完咗之後咧，如果係咁嗰陣時咧，就俾佢啲華人咧都係屬於公民啦咁，即係咁咪1947年 ，OK， 1947年你可以申請你咧家人，如果你過去咧，你有 family 喺中國啊或者喺邊度咧，你都唔可以過嚟嘅 ，OK 嗱，所以咧只係咧就係即係你話。嗰啲華人咧，多數都冚唪唥都係一個人喺度，單身嘅 ，OK， 單身。所以咧呢啲嘢咧，同我哋而家啲社區咧嗰啲或者支持中產會啊咩乜物啊，呢啲係有關係嘅，因為過去咧冚唪唥都係 single 嘅，一個人喺度咁啊，所以咧。
What Uncle G was referring to was a pretty terrible period in Canadian history for Chinese people, and let's be honest, pretty much anyone who wasn't white. In the late 1800s, there was an influx of Chinese immigration to America and Canada's west coasts. Many came to seek fortunes in gold mining, then to help build the Canadian Pacific Railway, to work on farms, the coal mines, and the logging industry.Every
5 kilometers 一個中國人死，係嘛？死咗幾多中國人啊？
In 1885, immediately after construction of the railroad was complete, however, the federal government passed the Chinese Immigration Act, which stipulated that, with almost no exception, every person of Chinese origin immigrating to Canada had to pay a fee of $50, called a head tax. In 1903, it went up to $500 per person, which at the time was equivalent to a railroad worker's 10 years' salary. Between 1885 and 1923, approximately 81,000 Chinese immigrants paid the head tax, some going into extreme debt, contributing tens of millions of dollars to the federal government. No other group in Canadian history has ever been forced to pay a tax based solely on their country of origin. And in 1923, as if that wasn't bad enough, the Chinese Exclusion Act came into effect on July 1st, which banned all Chinese immigrants from coming into Canada with the exception of some merchants and students in Edmonton's case. Since Dominion Day, or now Canada Day, coincided with the enforcement of this racist legislation, Chinese Canadians at the time referred to the anniversary of Confederation as Humiliation Day and refused to take part in any of the celebrations.
我呢嗰陣時呢就係17、18歲咁。我呢就係我本人呢就係賣豬仔嚟㗎啦，我唔準呢華人即係舊時呢個個呢都係喺呢度係單身嘅，多數係男丁。OK 喺呢度啦，呢個長時間啦 OK，咁啊只係呢就啲人呢就翻去中國結婚，但係佢太太呢留喺中國，留喺入邊咁，佢自己又翻嚟㗎。咁呢啲人呢舊時就話：哇！你有1、2年呢，因為2年呢有翻嚟一次㗎咯，咩咯咁啊？有啲人呢又講，咁啊。嗰個人咧翻嚟話：哇！我生咗1個仔或者2個仔，都冇人生女。因為咧嗰啲仔嗰陣時咧生個仔嗰陣時咧，你可以將嗰張紙啊，如果自己唔係真係有個仔用嗰陣時，你可以賣俾人哋。OK。你可以賣俾人哋，啲人哋認你做老豆咁啊過嚟㗎。嗱，所以咧嗰個年代咧就好多人咧就係咁啦，即係買張紙過嚟嗱，咁嘅情形啦。
Paper sons were very common at the time, essentially a fake identity to get to come to Canada.
根據我嗰陣時咧就聽到即係嗰啲人咧講咧就即係又話使都係幾百人，至多係幾百人華人香港都唔係好多嘅。OK， 咁嗰陣時咧佢話你企喺唐人街咧，你都可以數過，係咁嘅情形咯，就可少。至緊嗰陣時咧就係你而家睇到嗰啲高樓大廈咧。嗰陣時完全都冇嘅 ，OK。50年代呢都完全都冇，最高嘅樓係邊個？係嗰間舊嘅麥當勞 hotel， 係只係一間 ，OK。嗱，50年代初期呢，呢個 Jasper Avenue 呢，然後 Boardwalk 唔係。
The Exclusion Act was finally repealed in 1947 due to various reasons. The experiences of the Holocaust made racial discrimination against Chinese Canadians unacceptable, at least from the standpoint of government policy. Canada couldn't maintain its racist legislation without looking pretty hypocritical. And with Chinese Canadian contributions in World War II, like Uncle G explained, and also because the legislation violated the UN Charter, the Government of Canada had no choice but to repeal the Chinese Exclusion Act and gave Chinese Canadians full citizenship rights in 1947. Uncle G arrived in Edmonton in 1949, but it wasn't until the 1960s, when Canada introduced the points-based immigration system, that Chinatown started to become reinvigorated again, with this new flood of Chinese immigrants, mainly from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Malaysia. Chinatown began to grow, but its future was still uncertain, especially going into the late 1970s, when Chinatown residents were informed that this whole area west of 97th Street between Jasper Avenue and 102nd Avenue which if you remember was filled with Chinese businesses and residents at the time, was going to be demolished for the construction of the federal building of Canada Place. To try and learn more about Chinatown's development and what it was like, I reached out to Lan Chan Marples, a local historian, researcher, and Chinatown educator who actually grew up in Chinatown with her family. I met up with her at a mahjong workshop at the downtown's farmers market, and after a few rounds with the aunties and teaching some passerbys the joys of the game, we walked over to the Chinatown Chinese Library, where Auntie Lan recounted some of her childhood memories.
Okay, to begin with, we immigrated here from Hong Kong in the early 1960s. My parents decided to come here because they thought that it'll give us a better future. And I think that's a very common story. In our case, when we didn't have a choice as to where we want to go, which city we want to go, because we were actually sponsored by a church group here, and it wasn't even a Chinese church group. And so because they sponsor us, we have to come to Edmonton. We actually have relatives, and my grandfather was living in Toronto. So when we first came here, we actually flew to Calgary, and we took the train up from Calgary to Edmonton. And it was in October, so it was the first time we saw snow. When we came here, the church group put us up at the Alberta Hotel, funny enough. So until they found us accommodation, and it was about 3 days later, they just find us a place, and it's right smack in Chinatown, which was only 2 or 3 blocks away from Alberta Hotel. So we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and there were 5 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment. And we went to school, so we started school here. In fact, we went to Alex Taylor's school. And then after that, I actually went to Macaulay, which was a junior high school. We lived in Chinatown for about a dozen years. And of course, we socialized with all the other Chinese immigrant kids here. We get to know, we would hang out together because most of us lived in either small rooms or space with a lot of family. You can't go to each other's home and play or visit because there's other people around, siblings or even grandparents. We learned to actually find our own amusement outside. And then on the weekends, we actually would accompany our parents to the city market. I mean, if you talk to any Chinese children who grew up in Chinatown, that's really the memory, is that, yes, we would go to the Chinese stores where 97th Street Canada Place is. We'll go to the barbecue house, or we will stop for coffee in the Chinese store or buy Chinese dry goods or whatever. And then we go to the city market to buy fresh fruit and fresh meat from the city market. And after that, we will then head north to the GWG building, or at that time it's called Army and Navy's. And that's where we would pick up things like our clothes, bed sheets, household wares. And I remember that all of us actually have our running shoes came from Army and Navy. And those are the cloth running shoes at that time. And they were like $1 a pair. And so you either get to choose white or black. That's it. No other choice. Anyway, living in Chinatown, we got to know a lot of the families because the women work at GWG. My mom worked at GWG as a sewer. And so she got to know the women here. My dad actually didn't work in a restaurant, unlike my friends, when we were growing up, the other children, my dad didn't work in a Chinese restaurant or a Chinese store. He didn't work in Chinatown, and he didn't want to work in Chinatown. He did get a job in a non-Chinese place, and he really enjoyed that. But they do hang out. They have friends, Chinese friends, and they do hang out together, especially my mom. They would make arrangements to meet at the city market, and that's where they would catch up on news and gossip and all those kind of things. And while the kids, kind of hang around and, until they're finished, then we'll go to the next place. The key thing is that we go with our parents there really is to carry stuff home for them. Dreamland Theater was still around. And so every weekend, when they have Chinese movies, like from Hong Kong, and they have those theaters, we'll all be going there and we'll be going there watching movies. And then our parents or the Chinese seniors or whoever were watching, they'll be bringing the Chinese snacks like the watermelon seeds, the guazi, the peanuts, and the dry fruits, so the chanpei mui, and we'll be eating, snacking in there. But being kids, we wanted to buy food from the theater's concession stand, like the pop and the popcorn and the chocolate, the candies. And so we will always beg our parents if we can do that. And our parents will give us some money, but then we had to make it stretch, and then you had to choose what do you want to buy? Do you want spend all your money on a chocolate bar, or do you want to drink and buy toffee? Because toffee was the cheapest thing there, and you could hear all the watermelon seeds cracking in between people's teeth. So that. And then people would be passing all their goods around, sharing, because everybody would, it was all very friendly. If you have food to share, you just share it. Because the community was very small then, but everybody knows everybody. And so you're able to do that and still have a good time. So It is. It's like one big family. Chinatown was like one big family. And we weren't afraid when we were growing up there in a way that we will be afraid now.
Old Chinatown, as it's sometimes referred to, where Uncle G first arrived and where Auntie Lan grew up, had to be moved for the construction of Canada Place. So throughout the late 70s and early 80s, Chinatown leaders such as Auntie May's late husband, Kim Hung, and Uncle G worked hard to win the support of Chinese residents and all levels of government to build this replaced Chinatown, just east between 96th and 95th Street, and about the same 4 blocks from Jasper Avenue up to 102nd Avenue. A Chinatown master plan from this time showed what was imagined for this new Chinatown space. This plan dreamt of a Chinese ceremonial square and a Chinese garden and archways for all Edmontonians to enjoy. And this plan seemed important because there was this real urgency to move businesses, preserve those clan associations, and also look for potential opportunities to build on relationships with the different levels of government and what could come from that for the community. And at the same time, more and more demolitions of old Chinatown were happening on the heels of Canada Place to make room for buildings such as the Citadel Theatre and the Law Courts building, which still exists there today. At the same time, while replaced Chinatown was being planned and things were being deliberated, many businesses decided to move or open further north, past the Canadian National Railway overpass on 97th Street around 105th Avenue. Rent was a lot cheaper up there, and the fate of the old Chinatown area was still uncertain. What really began to develop this newer area started in 1979, when over 50,000 Vietnamese and Vietnamese Chinese immigrants came to Edmonton over a period of 2 years when Canada agreed to accept Indo-Chinese refugees. By 1986, this whole area developed into a thriving Vietnamese and Chinese commercial district and became known as Chinatown North. And throughout the 80s and 90s, with Chinatown community fundraising efforts, city organizations and government support, a multicultural center, elders' mansions, a seniors' lodge, a care center, and China Gate emerged in this replaced Chinatown, which is now known as Chinatown South. So we see that we now have two pretty distinct Chinatowns in Edmonton. One that was created due to the displacement of Chinese residents and cultural associations, and one that is newer and much more commercially driven, as well as more ethnically diverse.
而家真係好多呢度唔係好多中國人住喺呢度。係啊。OK， 點解仲要保留華埠？你點睇法？197街105 Avenue 上個商業嘅嗰度。係係。而家似乜嘢？而家我哋而家要有 security guard 嚟巡嗰度，成日都有人喺度打針。 成日都人打嗰啲門咧，就俾人哋嗰啲人打爛晒玻璃。我哋仲可唔可以存在喺華埠？第一個仲有，我哋應唔應要需要保留華埠好？我哋講個歷史。咁而家第二個重點就係點樣維護我哋華人嘅華埠。
Our Chinatowns and its people's histories are full of stories of sacrifice, adaptation, struggle, and literally paving your own path. Thinking about all I get to enjoy here in this city now, none of it would have been possible without the efforts of early pioneers and people like Uncle G, fighting for the respect and care for the Chinese population. But with all of the challenges Chinatown faces today, it's clear that there's a lot of work to do. After learning about the history and what the Chinese people of Uncle G's generation went through and fought for, I honestly have a lot more questions than answers. I think it's time to pay a visit to Chinatown North and see what's going on today.